Thank you. Oh, thank you. All right, this is a fantastic crowd. You know, I was up here a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and then our morning meteorologist took over for a while, so it's been 2 or 3 years since I've been back. But, you know, hurricane expos don't get a lot of people anymore. A lot of people have become complacent. They you know, it's been, what, 2005 since we've had a big storm here, a significant storm, other than Faye. Of course, we had some rain from Faye, but it's tough to get people sometimes to Hurricane Expo. So I thank you all for coming out today. This is just great, fantastic. Before I forget, the scouts just came up to me. They want to remind everyone you can buy these fire extinguishers for $5 out at their table. So, which is actually good, because after a storm, one of the biggest causes of deaths after a hurricane or a tropical storm are house fires from candles, candle fires. So it's always nice to have a couple of these around. All right, I'm Steve Weagle from, well, I do 2 TV stations now, NBC and Fox. And I'm going to talk a little bit about hurricane season, the weather aspects more, a little bit about evacuations and that sort of thing. And if you have any questions, I'll answer them at the end. I suspect I have we'll have enough time. I'll probably talk for about 20, 25 minutes, and then if you have any questions, which I'm sure you will, I can't cover everything, and I kind of have to breeze through a couple of things so I don't get too... I ramble on like I'm doing right now, so I'll try to keep it quick. All right, hurricane season starts June 1st and it rolls through November 30th, but the peak of the season is mid-August through about mid-October. That's where we get 70 to 80% of our tropical storms or hurricanes. So the red area here, that's the peak. And when you think back to 04 and 05, our big storms, they were September right through about late October. Wilma was a little unusual. That was a very late season storm and a very powerful storm. But it formed in that big peak area. If there's a peak day, it would be September 11th, so we get half of our storm season before that and half of it after. We can get storms outside the season. We had 2, actually, that formed in May last year. So we can get the A and B storms early, even before June 1st. But most, as I said, form August through about mid-October. We may have one actually, obviously this is June 1st, so this is the start of the season. We may actually have one this week form in the Gulf of Mexico. Yeah, there's something out there off the Yucatan that has some potential for Thursday or Friday this week to develop into a depression or storm. Right now, most of the models kind of hint up through the panhandle, maybe for a landfall if it does develop. Either way, it looks like heavy rain for us the second half of this week. Like we're not done with the rain already. So that's hurricane season. And like I said, September is the peak month. These are the percentages each month that we see hurricanes or tropical storms. And you notice September, about 34% of our storms form in that month. But more hurricanes make landfall in Florida in October than September. So there's actually more of a threat here statistically in October than there is in September. But out there in the Atlantic, obviously it's very busy in September. That's when weather conditions are just really favorable for development. Can everyone hear me in the back too? Okay? Okay, good. So there you go. Now, day to day, I'm a degreed meteorologist. So day to day, I do my own weather forecast, you know, partly cloudy, partly sunny, chance of a shower. But when hurricanes come, all the local TV stations use the Hurricane Center information. We don't want you flipping through channels and on my station, you know what, don't worry about this one, it's not going to hit. And then turn to another station, and they're like, you have to evacuate. This is going to be bad. We want all the information to be consistent because it's life and death. It's very, very serious. Partly cloudy isn't so serious, but hurricanes coming are. So the Hurricane Center gives us 2 valuable pieces of information. And it's in this cone here. One is where the storm's going, and the second is how strong it's going to be. And they do it out 5 days, so out 120 hours. And each position is, well, there's 12, 24, 36, 48, 72, 96, and then 120. The Hurricane Center does a very good job with the forecast tracks. The error cone is actually getting smaller and smaller each year because the computer models they're becoming much, much better than they were even 5 and 10 years ago. But the intensity forecast, how strong it's going to be, there's still a lot of work to be done. And in fact, those forecasts haven't improved in the last 20, 25 years. The computer models have a very difficult time understanding the physics that goes on near the eye of a hurricane, the dynamics inside that storm that makes it stronger or weaker. And so what I always tell people, let's say a Category 2 hurricane is coming this way, and it's over St. Lucie County, and it's going to be a Category 2 when it comes here. You should really be thinking to yourself the most likely situation is a Category 2, but it may be a 1 or it may be a 3. I would give yourself some latitude there. And it can make a big difference. You know, the difference between a 2 and a 3 is significant. It's a difference between tree branches and some structural damage and the power being out for weeks and weeks. So you keep that in mind when you make your plans when a storm's coming. Intensity forecast, how strong it's going to be, not so good. The best example, I think, in the last few years of that was Hurricane Charlie. Charlie was a Category 2 hurricane on a Friday afternoon in August in 2004 off Fort Myers. And in about 3 hours, it turned into a Category 4. The difference between a 2 and a 4 is your power going out and your whole house gone. And when it made landfall, people really scrambled. So I always tell people, you know, prepare for the worst case situation. Here are the storm names for this year. They go in alphabetical order, male, female, A to Z, but some letters are left off, like Y and Z. They feel like they can't get enough storm names with those letters. They're recycled every 6 years, so many of these names may look familiar to you from 6 years ago. They'll be used again in 6 years, with one exception. If the storm is significant, if it does a lot of damage, if there are deaths, the name is retired. So Hurricane Sandy from last year is a retired name. You'll never hear Sandy again. Andrew, Katrina, Francis, Jean, Wilma, all those storm names are now retired. So they replace them with other names. They're rated on a scale from Category 1 to Category 5. Category 1 the weakest, Category 5 the strongest. Only 3 Category 5 hurricanes have ever made landfall in the U.S. The 1935 hurricane in the Florida Keys, it took out Flagler's Railroad. There's a monument as you drive down into Key Largo, right in between the north and the south part of the highway. There's this big concrete monument that is dedicated to I believe about 300 or 400 people who lost their lives when that storm made landfall. They were building Flagler's Railroad at the time. It's a fascinating story. There was actually a train sent down to save those people, and the train reached them at the height of the hurricane, and it blew off the tracks. So 1935 hurricane, Hurricane Camille in 1969, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a second, and one other storm, Category 5, that made landfall in the U.S. Andrew, yes, Andrew. Andrew was always believed to be a Category 4 up until about, I think, 6 or 7 years ago, and then new research came into play. Here is the problem with Andrew. There are hundreds of little weather sensors around Miami and Homestead and up around Lauderdale. You know, the 3 little cups that spin around, they're called anemometers. They all blew away. The last one survived about 145 miles an hour, and it blew away. So our strongest confirmed wind was a Category 4 storm. But research with the dropsondes, these little weather instruments that fall out of airplanes, they do a very good job at recording what's going on in the storm. They realized that they were underestimating the winds and hurricanes. They realized that the winds in Andrew were probably around 170 sustained winds. So that makes it a Category 5 because it bumps up on the scale. Here's kind of the life cycle of a hurricane or a tropical storm. Most start off as tropical waves off the coast of Africa. We get about 60 to 80 tropical waves a year that come off the coast. And what's a tropical wave? Well, it's just an area of showers and thunderstorms. Here's a satellite picture, the coast of Africa. It's much like what we get here to the west in the afternoon, those big thunderstorms that pop up. They're just thunderstorms. And they come off the coast of Africa. They're headed that way, like here's one right here. They come off the coast. And if they get a little bit of a spin to them, they become tropical depressions. They're not given a name yet. They're given a number, tropical depression 1, 2, 3. If the winds continue to strengthen, then they become tropical storms, and they're given a name. If the winds reach 74 miles an hour or stronger, then they become hurricanes. And eventually, they end up in the hurricane graveyard of the North Atlantic. The water is very cold. upper level winds are very strong. They cut into hurricanes. The ironic thing with hurricanes is that they don't like strong winds. They like their own peaceful little environment. And when you get the jet stream and these strong winds cutting into hurricanes, they fall apart pretty quickly. So that's what happens when they get up north of us, north of the Carolinas usually. They really get cut apart pretty quickly. Now this is the kind of a textbook situation, but many storms will form in the Caribbean and the Gulf. They don't have to form off the coast of Africa to form, but usually there are these tropical waves that continue right across the Atlantic, and by the time they make it here, they start to get a little bit of a spin. They always say the right side of the track is the worst weather in a hurricane, and usually that's the case. That's where you get the highest storm surge. The right side of the track would be, if the storm is going this way, that's the right side of the track, that's the left side of the track. It's where you get the highest storm surge, the greatest threat for tornadoes, usually sometimes the heaviest rainfall, and the strongest winds. Because what happens in a hurricane is, let's say the hurricane's going 20 miles an hour, it's spinning around like this, and the winds are 100 miles an hour. You actually add the forward speed and the wind speed on this side of the hurricane to get 120 miles an hour. Now, you don't have to do that calculation at home. The Hurricane Center does that for you. When we say the winds in this hurricane are 120 miles an hour, that's the strongest wind. And it could be anywhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the right side of the track. It could be anywhere in the storm. So for Francis and Jean, this was the right side of the track because it made landfall South Hutchinson Island through the inlet area. This was the worst spot. In Hurricane Andrew, it was just north of the Keys, around Homestead, famous areas like Country Walk and Naranja Lakes that were hit hard. They were on the right side of the track, that northern eye wall. This was kind of the northern eye wall here for at least a while. Now, early in the season, in June and July, storms usually form in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. As the season gets a little bit busier and water temperatures heat up, weather conditions become a little bit more favorable, we start to see the storms form off in the Atlantic. That usually happens about August 15th. So I always take my vacation right up until August 15th, and then I come back to work. Because that, like I said, we usually get most of our storms after August 15th. That's Sandy last year. That's Hurricane Sandy. A lot of confusion with Sandy. We always learn things from hurricane landfalls. That's why we have the conferences each year. As Sandy was approaching the coast, they actually dropped all the hurricane warnings for that area because they didn't expect it to be a hurricane at landfall. But that confused a lot of people because it's still a powerful storm. It still has hurricane force winds. It's just that it's turned into what we call a mid-latitude storm, like a fall-like storm, rather than kind of a nor'easter type storm. But it still obviously had a big punch. And the problem with Sandy was not the wind or the rain, it was the storm surge. Here's another famous hurricane for storm surge, and we made changes after this storm. This is Hurricane Ike. This is 5 or 6 years ago. This is headed to Galveston, Texas. I believe it's a Category 3 or 4 at this point, but it made landfall. There's Florida there, obviously. It's headed over here. And people in Texas were watching this, and at first they're like, Category 4, I could have watched this thing. I mean, this is serious. But as it approached the coast, it became a Category 2. It weakened. And people are like, you know what, I can ride this one out. It's a Category 2. I don't have to be too worried about it. I'll lose power. It's going to be, the branches down, stuff like that. But I can ride this one out. The problem with that is that even a Category 2 large storm can have a huge storm surge. Storm surge, the best example I can give you was given to me by Bob Sheets at dinner one night. He held up a glass of water, filled to the top, and he blew across it. And on the other side of the rim of the glass, the water starts to pile up. You're making a mini storm surge when you do that. It's the friction of the wind blowing over the water, and it piles up. So in the ocean, the hurricane winds are blowing toward the beaches, and all the water's piling up along the beach. And it takes hours and hours and hours. It's not instantaneous. And in fact, if you went to the beach and watched it, it would probably be pretty difficult to see, at least over a half-hour period. It takes hours. Now, in Hurricane Ike, which I just showed you, the storm surge turned out to be 18 feet. Well, 18 feet does a lot of damage in Galveston, Texas. In fact, this is the Barrier Islands. It completely washed right over the barrier island. I believe this is called the Boulevard Peninsula. I think it's just north of Galveston. There's one little feature here. I don't know if you can see it in that picture. It's right there. We call it the last house standing. I believe it was the only house in the area that was up to hurricane code. Either way, they got some new real estate. I don't have a recent picture of this, but this is right after Ike. And the water would have been up to the second floor of that house. This is another famous storm surge building. This is the Richelieu Apartments, 1969, past Christian, Mississippi. 3-story apartment building. They decided to have a hurricane party here, about 30 people. Now, the Gulf of Mexico is right here. This is US 90, kind of like an A1A type road. So that's before. Camille was a Category 5 hurricane. The storm surge in Camille was almost 30 feet. So this is what happened to the Richelieu Apartments. Completely washed away. One person survived. And when you go on vacation, you'll go to New York or Disney World or Fort Myers. I go to old hurricane landfall areas because I'm a weather nerd. And so I went back here about 10 years ago. Oh, no, about maybe 7 or 8, to see what was there now, because this is 1969. They built a Winn-Dixie and a Rite Aid. That's US 90 there. I'm standing, I'm almost on the beach here. So that Winn-Dixie is about a foot above sea level. And I've used this picture for several years, and someone saw this, and they sent me a more updated picture. Something happened in the last 7 or 8 years in this area. Anyone have any idea? Katrina. When I drove down US 90, it was mind-boggling. You could obviously build anything, anywhere, out of anything you wanted. There were no building codes or nothing that made any sense. So Katrina came through, and someone saw me give this presentation. And because this is a famous, the Richelieu Apartments was a very famous building of kind of like what not to do. It's almost as famous as the Hurricane Center building. Someone sent me a picture of what's there now, or what was there. The Winn-Dixie's gone. Rite Aid's gone. The water went in about 5 to 6 miles. The storm surge water. It's a foot above sea level. There's the Gulf of Mexico right there. So just all completely washed away. I was standing, I think, right around there. So your next question would be, how bad would the storm surge be here? And that's Palm Beach County. Here's closer to this area. It's a little farther south, but you can see the county, when they make their evacuation areas, they make it based on storm surge, worst case scenario for storm surge. So you can look in this guide, and you can go to St. Lucie County. That's Martin County there. I gave a talk at the Treasure Coast Square Mall last week. That's why that map's up. But you can look for St. Lucie County in here, and the colored areas are the worst case scenario for storm surge. That's what we base the evacuation areas on. And you'll notice something here. See how, now this is the St. Lucie Inlet here, right? Am I making sure? Yes. There's Sailfish Point there. See how the colored areas go miles inland up the river? What happens is, in storm surge, the water piles up in the inlet and it can't go anywhere. So it rushes up the rivers, and in the rivers, they get narrower and narrower. And that water can't go anywhere except up. So even miles and miles inland into Palm City, and of course up north, that water is just flowing up the river. And it's getting higher and higher. So people, and I've seen this many times, they go, I don't have to worry about storm surge. I'm 6 miles away from the beach. No, if you're on the water or close to the water, you do. You do definitely. So we always tell people, that's the first thing you should do when you make your plans. Look to see if you're in an evacuation area, because you can make a decision right now. Where am I going to go if a storm comes? We always recommend to people, don't go to Orlando or Tampa or Atlanta or Key West or wherever. Try to stay in this county or a neighboring county, because 95 and the Turnpike are parking lots. My neighbor in Hurricane Francis decided he was going to go to Gainesville to stay with his daughter. Well, I lived in Jupiter at the time. After 10 hours, he was in Yeehaw Junction. He's still got a long way to go. So he turned around and drove back home and rode out the storm in his house. But it just shows you it's crazy, especially when there's a bad hurricane. No one's going anywhere on those roads. You have to leave days and days in advance. So we always tell people, there's an old saying, run from water, hide from wind. So if you live along the ocean, try to get inland and in a well-protected house with hurricane codes. Our building codes are arguably the best in the country, or pretty close to it now, after we had some upgrades in 2003. So all new homes are very, very good, and a lot of the older homes with mitigation are also very good now. Very, very good. So they've done an excellent job upgrading. Bob Sheets always called hurricanes urban renewal projects. They would come in, they'd clean up everything that didn't belong there, and we could build the stuff stronger. And we didn't have a strong hurricane here for a long, long time. And then Francis and Jean came, and well, you saw the mess. I mean, it was amazing. And it was what I found. It was amazing to see. Jean hit 3 weeks to the hour after Francis. Francis was September 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Just went on for days. And Jean was Francis was a 2. Jean was a Category 3. But it was really surprising to see, we had a chance in those 3 weeks to clean up a lot of the stuff that blew away. And when Jean came through, there wasn't that garbage everywhere, that stuff that really didn't belong in Florida, building in Florida. So even at that point, we had kind of bumped up our building situation as far as, it's significant because in a hurricane, a lot of the damage is done not by the wind, but by the coconuts and the 2x4s flying at 150 miles an hour through. When they rate hurricane shutters, they don't put it in a wind tunnel and blow 150 mile an hour wind at it. They put a 2x4 in a cannon, and they stand on one side of the room, and they shoot it at the hurricane shutter or the hurricane glass, and if it doesn't go through, it passes. They don't care about the wind. The wind really doesn't, wind gusts will do damage, but debris will do more significant damage. Now the Bermuda High, which played a big part here on the Treasure Coast in '04, because Francis and Jean hit here because of that Bermuda High and where it was positioned. Usually the high is kind of off in the middle of the Atlantic or to the eastern Atlantic in the summer. But what happens is the hurricanes can't go through this high pressure. They can't just turn. It's like a wall. So they're forced west, and then they'll turn. And normally, 10, 15 years ago, the Carolinas they were getting all the hurricane landfalls. It was like no one wanted to live in the Carolinas. It was one after another, because the high was where it was supposed to be, and those storms could turn, and they become more of a threat to them. Now, if the high shifts like it did in 2004, like this, where the high is so strong, even over Florida, those storms have to go farther west before they can turn north, and they become a threat to us. And that's what happened in '04. Francis came in. Jean, if you remember, that crazy storm was way north here and got stuck under the high, did a complete loop, and then came back. It was headed off to Iceland. It was gone. And it got trapped under that high pressure system, did a complete 360, and came right back at us. And eventually hit in the same spot that Francis did 3 weeks earlier. Now, the unfortunate thing is that this year, there may be indications that this pattern is around. Dr. Bill Gray, who does a forecast for hurricane season, along with NOAA, they look at a bunch of factors. They look at water temperatures, obviously, if it's warmer than normal, which it is this year. They look at whether there's an El Nino or La Nina. That's why the seasonal hurricane forecasts were kind of a bust last year. The forecast expected that we'd see an El Nino form. Whenever there's a strong El Nino, there are very few hurricanes. Last year, the El Nino never formed. So we turned out to be the third busiest season ever, tied for the third busiest. It was very busy last year. Rainfall in Africa and pressure systems around the world, all those factors go into place. There's a water temperature map. This isn't recent, but this is kind of what it looks like this year too. We don't look, people always say, oh, the water's warm at the beach, it's going to be a bad hurricane season. We don't care about that. Hurricanes aren't forming a mile off the Treasure Coast. They're forming in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, or the Atlantic. That's where water temperatures are important, not at the beach here. So this year, the water temperatures are warmer than normal in the Atlantic. So that could be a trigger for a busy season. El Nino, like I said, hurricanes don't like strong winds. El Nino makes strong winds farther south, so as the hurricanes come off the coast, they get cut up by the storm before they get a chance to develop. So this is Dr. Bill Gray's forecast. Normally we get 12 named storms. So this is a busy, busy hurricane forecast. NOAA has come out with similar numbers. They give a range. I think their range this year is 13 to 20. Don't quote me on that, but I believe so. I don't put a lot of weight on these forecasts. I know everyone at home likes to see them, but you should plan whether it's a busy season or a slow season. 1992 was a very slow season. The first storm that formed in 1992 was late August. It was Andrew, and it hit in an otherwise slow season. So if you go down to Miami and say, hey, was 92 a slow hurricane season? You're like, are you crazy? It was billions and billions of dollars in damage. So it's very important that you prepare even if it's a slower busy. Like last year. Last year was tied for the third busiest season, yet there wasn't really anything too significant up here. We had Isaac in Palm Beach County with crazy, crazy flooding, but it was relatively quiet. So it doesn't matter if it's slow or busy. Now, here's the one troubling thing with this year, is that Bill Gray, when they make the hurricane forecast, they look back at similar seasons with similar weather patterns, and they call those analog years. And they pick 2 or 3 in the past century that have similar conditions. Well, they've picked 2004 as one of those years that has similar conditions. And we know 2004 was very busy here. So this could be a very busy season for us. You know, it's impossible to predict. These guys come out and they're like, oh, there's a higher than normal chance of something making landfall. Sometimes we can't get the next 5 days right. How do you expect the forecast for September? You know, so pay very little attention to that. Just get prepared. Just be prepared. I think that's my last. Oh, yeah, as you know, you have the storm guide. And don't throw it away. Please keep it around because you can refer back to it as the season gets going. And, you know, it's has hurricane supplies listed and, of course, the evacuation routes and that sort of thing. I think that's my last one there. So I just tell everyone, get ready now. Make some plans. If you're in an I'm in an evacuation area, but I know where I'm going to be. I'll be at a TV station for 2 weeks. My wife, she knows where she's going to go. And she has that plan already made. We actually have a big cooler at home with hurricane supplies, and she just grabs that cooler. She won't buy water just yet and that sort of stuff. She'll wait, but it's good to have that stuff because, you know, buying supplies at the last minute is also very, very crazy. The lines are it's madness. It really is. It's great news stories for us, but Home Depot and Publix and all those places just huge lines. All right, does anyone have any questions? I'll try to answer a few. A weather satellite failed, yes, a couple of weeks ago. Well, it shouldn't affect us because there was a replacement satellite already up there that they're already using. So we should be okay. They always try to have backups, and there was one that's already actually working. We had some issues in '98 with a satellite failing, and it was Hurricane Mitch, and Mitch hit the Yucatan, or it hit Central America. It was a Category 5 hurricane, and we couldn't see it at all, or barely. This one's already been kind of replaced, if you will. So we should be okay with that. Satellites are invaluable. You don't have satellites. Here's the other thing with the satellites. You know, as we go through the years, starting in the late 60s, we started to get these satellites, and we could see storms that formed way out in the Atlantic that we would never have known before. So we're seeing stuff early on that in the past you would only know if you were on a ship out there or, I don't know, flying over it. So satellites are invaluable. They really are. Anyone else? In the back? Oh, my bike. I did a bike ride for the Red Cross last week. I biked from Sebastian to Boca. I came through here on Tuesday afternoon, I got rained on. I got rained on every day. It was amazing how much rain. And I auctioned it off last night in Boca, and it went for $12,500. Yeah. And the whole ride, actually, I believe the final total was $48,100. I think. Yeah. So it was very good. I think that's our highest amount ever. I don't really do it for the money, although it all goes to the Red Cross, so it's great. But we tied into hurricane season. People always say, well, why do you do it when the heat is on? Well, we do it the first week of hurricane season, so we try to get people aware. I came through here Tuesday. I broadcasted from the marina in Fort Pierce, and then I headed down to Stewart. That was a long day. The worst day was Wednesday, though. That was Stewart to West Palm. It just rained and wind the whole time. And they have a shirt for me, a Red Cross ride shirt, but it's cotton, so it's like an extra 20 pounds when it gets wet. Next year I'm getting one of those spandex dry things or whatever it is. Anyone else? Yeah? You have, the question is, if you want to get out of town, how early do you have to do it? Really early, days. And here's the other problem that's coming into play. Because we now do 5-day forecasts for hurricanes, people have a lot of lead time. So some people really, they do get out early. Here's the drawback to leaving early, though. The tracks aren't always perfect. In fact, so here's a perfect example. Hurricane Charlie, 2004, August 13th. It was headed to Tampa. It was going to Tampa. It was going to make landfall in Tampa. So everyone in Tampa evacuated to Orlando. Well, where'd the hurricane go? Orlando. Orlando had almost 100-mile-an-hour winds that Friday night over the airport. And then it went right up I-4 in toward Daytona. And we had a guy on the news that night. He was in a hotel room in Orlando, and he said, I feel like the biggest fool. I evacuated from Tampa to Orlando. I'm spending $300 a night to go through the middle of a hurricane. So that's why we tell people, try to stay in your county, friends, family, or a neighboring county. Don't try to travel hours. And if it's going to happen if a big storm comes, like a Category 4 or 5, people run. Like Floyd in '99 came here, and it didn't hit us. It turned. It went over Abaco. But millions and millions of people left. And honestly, even I, at Category 5, I'd leave. If I could, I'd leave. Yeah. No, I'm here for the duration. Actually, Hurricane Francis, which was a 2, our building took a big hit. The roof started to fall in. Ugh. It was a mess. No, that was the new building. Yeah. Oh, in Hurricane Andrew. Yeah, well, if you remember Andrew, I wasn't here at the time, but Andrew's initial forecast for looking back were like kind of Daytona, and then as the weekend the weekend wore on, it became this area, then it became West Palm, then it became Lauderdale. It kept shifting south and south and south because Andrew was a weird storm. Andrew tracked it caught under the high, and it tracked due west for 2 to 3 days, literally like Francis. It just got trapped under that high, and it was just forced west. But our tracks now are much better. I watched old tapes from Andrew, TV weather guys from Andrew, maybe a month ago. They weren't even showing the tracks. I don't even know. Maybe there wasn't even certainly not the tracks that we have now. Our track information and the forecasts have become much better. Yeah, greatly improved. Yeah, it's much better now. Andrew changed a lot of things, and one is the information and the preparation. Maybe one more question? Yeah, it's in the question is, are there emergency locations where you can go in a hurricane, and they're listed. They should be listed in the guide. That guide, we use the most up-to-date information, but shelter locations can change at times, even up until the last day. And some open and some don't open, depending on the storm. But the list should be in there for St. Lucie County. Yeah. And usually there's schools that are rated for stronger winds, and they're away from the water. Well, they'll all be away from the water. There'll be nothing on the water. But yeah, remember, shelters, Red Cross shelters should be a last resort. They're not good places it's uncomfortable. That's why, one of the reasons I'm here today. Try to make your plan now if you feel like your house won't go through the storm. You're on a cot with a few hundred other people in a huge room like this. And I've heard some stories where the power will go out, and it's a tough, you're safe, but it's not, you're not sitting there watching TV. It's a rough ride. And pets, most of these shelters don't take pets if you have pets. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, no, absolutely. They do a fantastic job with the shelters. They're very, very important. People use them, definitely. Yes. Yeah, but I would say keep it as your last resort. Try to find something better now so you don't have to use it. Well, thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. And fantastic turnout. I really like it. I was driving up here. Honestly, I expected maybe 15, 20 people. So this is amazing. And thank you for having the interest. And you can, if you have any questions, you can email me. I post nonstop weather updates on my Facebook page. It makes me even tired at times. And you can email me if you have any more questions. So thank you.